my body through the medicine. I am listening.
What's up, y'all? This is Justin with the Appalachian Psychedelic Society. I am so stoked to bring you episode 2. It has been a minute since our first episode. A lot of things have changed as far as our vision goes. And the new team, the new face is me and a dear sister of mine, a soul friend of mine, Ali McGhee. I'm so stoked to have her on the team as we craft a new vision for the best way to support Appalachia, the best way to see a thriving Appalachia. Ali and I saw each other all the way back at Psychedelic Science in 2017 in San Francisco, California. So much has changed in the psychedelic world. So much has changed in each of our lives. We've been immersed in so many aspects of psychedelic culture for over a decade. And guess what? We still don't know much. This is a huge thing happening on our planet right now, in our culture, in our society, in our government, in our politics. And no matter your religious or spiritual take on what psychedelics are, we want our platform to be a resource for every stage of the psychedelic experience, whether you're curious about it, whether you've tried it, whether you've become disenchanted by it. We want to enter into meaningful discussion with you. We would like to see a communitas exist amongst Appalachians interested in psychedelics, but also in the psychedelic world at large. That's enough of my jibber jabbering. Let's get into the episode.
I am listening.
What's up, y'all? My name is Justin.
And I'm Ali.
And you're listening to the Appalachian Psychedelic Society podcast. I am super excited to get basically episode 1 recorded and shared for our listeners, for all Appalachians, for the psychedelic world at large. I'd like for us to maybe just share a little bit about ourselves. Can we start with Miss Ali McGhee?
Yes, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. I am one of the co-founders of Appalachian Psychedelic Society. Call myself the Chief Communications Officer, head up the newsletter, hop in and out of social media, all of those things, and I'm working on building some fun workshops for folks here and also elsewhere. Been really excited about that aspect of getting the word out about what we're doing. A little bit about me. I am born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina. So I'm one of they call us the unicorns, who was born here and more or less stayed here. I grew up in the forest, which actually is really an important part of my identity. Grew up in the woods, playing in the creeks, and really like connecting to the land from a really early age. Moved away from the Appalachian part of the state to go to college. I moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, way back in the day. And then from there, actually moved up to Rochester, New York, where I did a PhD in English. And in 2012, I realized that, I already knew it, but I desperately missed home. And I really missed the mountains, ever kind of since the moment I left. And I loved the other places I lived and traveled, but this area was always home to me. So I returned back and left academia behind for a career in various other things. But I'm a researcher and a writer at heart. I'm a mom to a sweet, adorable 3.5-year-old wildling, and I live just outside of Asheville now in a little town called Mars Hill, which is one county over. I'll stop there for now. It's just a little bit of my bio. So what about you? Who are you?
Yeah. All right, y'all. So my name's Justin. I'm originally from Churchill, Tennessee, part of the Tri-Cities in Northeast Tennessee, right in the heart of Southern Appalachia. My dad's family's from Southwest Virginia. My mom's more from Northeast Tennessee. So my youth was spent all around Appalachia and creeks and mountains, and I played basketball in high school as well. So I traveled all around Appalachia and the whole region. And yeah, I went to college at ETSU in Johnson City, Tennessee. and graduated from there in 2012 with a sociology degree and pursued my career joy of being a festival music producer, DJ guy. I really followed that dream for a while. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia for a little bit. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee for a long time. Eventually went out to Los Angeles. And much like you, Ali, while living in Los Angeles and San Diego, I started to miss home. I would go hiking in San Diego, and just my my heart was like, "Where's all the waterfalls?
Mm.
Where's all the greenery? Where's the diversity in ecology?" And it made me really have some perspective on how much I missed Appalachia, how special Appalachia is, being the second most biodiverse region in the world, and just how beautiful it is. So I moved to Asheville about 5 years ago and became a dad a couple years into that to my sweet son, who continues to be a inspiration and challenge in my life, a welcome challenge. I like to say that he is a constant invitation into the kingdom of childhood,
Mm.
and one that I can't always answer, but when I can, it's really sweet and
Mm.
powerful. I'm in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. I also work as an adjunctive therapist at an inpatient crisis stabilization center in Asheville. Yeah, that's that. I'd love for us to explore um, a little bit about our history with psychedelics and what brought us to feel the passion and excitement we have when it comes to the intersection of psychedelia and Appalachia. So, Ali, you want to share one of your first experiences, or what eventually brought you to psychedelics, or your own use, or your openness to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I uh had my first psychedelic experience pretty late, in terms of like my peers and what I know of my peers. And I also had been curious about it for a long time, right? During college, I think was when my curiosity really got piqued. I remember I was working in the college bookstore, UNC Chapel Hill, and I saw a copy of Jeremy Narby's Cosmic Serpent,
Mhm.
and I just got really intrigued by the book, sort of, wondering what it was all about. I was intrigued by the cover, and I picked it up and started reading about it, and I'd heard about ayahuasca. I knew a little bit about psychedelics, but did not know much, and kind of kept that curiosity on my back burner for a while. When I moved back to Asheville, really, which was again around 2012, was when it just kind of I think as it happens for a lot of people, it sort of dropped into my life a little bit more, kind of organically through some people that I knew and relationships that I had, and so I had an opportunity in someone I was in a relationship with to try psilocybin mushrooms for the first time, right? So I ended up having really incredible experience that was kind of, like personal. It wasn't sort of in a kind of party or festival scene, which is how I know a lot of people did encounter it the first time. That was something I wasn't necessarily interested in. And I really came to it with this place of really deep curiosity and also wanting it to be kind of a profound experience and hoping that it would be. So I ended up having a really profound experience with mushrooms that really kind of showed me this sort of like animistic web that actually bring up kind of the kingdom of childhood, but that had been really present to me as a child. And I think it was always something that I has kind of been the basis and foundation of my spiritual practice my whole life and kind of my feelings about spirituality. And it sort of showed me that again in this way that very much sort of fit with my personality and my own inclinations and interests and like belief in magic, and things like that. But it really clicked a lot of things into place for me. And it gave me this really deep, profound sense of meaning, but also peace. And at that point, it felt really important for me to keep exploring that space and to also figure out if I could potentially sort of play a role in, not introducing other people to psychedelics necessarily. I never felt like that was sort of my job to do, but in sort of like being able to talk about the experience in a way that people who had never considered it before, or maybe like had a lot of misgivings about it, would sort of maybe, at least build their curiosity as well. So a few years after that, I sat with ayahuasca for the first time. And that also became like for a while, that was a pretty regular practice for me. And I was sitting with this really wonderful group in Appalachia. And Appalachia was really, really interwoven in those experiences for me. So like really profoundly aware of the landscape I was sitting in and the land I was sitting on, and the kind of the plants and the kind of entities around me that were holding me in this experience. And that struck me as really interesting, that here I was experiencing this plant that does not grow here, right? But having these profound experiences that felt really embedded within this landscape I loved and that I called home. So from that point is where I became really interested in, like, I am passionate about this in a way that like I want to do something meaningful with this. Like, and I want to show up in the world in a meaningful way, in some way, right? With psychedelics. And I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I started exploring more like, what does this look like if this is part of my professional life and sort of my vocation, right? And I wasn't ever interested or felt like I could sort of become a shaman or something like that. But I know the gifts that I have, which are a lot around the written word and storytelling and things like that. So I started planting that seed of like, what would it look like if this became part of my life in this particular way? So that was a long history, shortened
Yeah.
a lot.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, sometimes there's a saying out there that folks say, that sometimes sitting with some of these medicines is like 10 years of therapy in a night. And while there's a lot of argument to the truth of that or not, trying to fit all of it into a useful narrative is a challenging process. Yeah, and I really want to recognize your courage in being able to speak out about this and share your story as a parent, which I can share in that as well. There is still so much stigma associated with receiving benefit from using these medicines and substances. Even so much as like part of my own integration process, I tell myself that like I didn't heal wrong because I received benefit from my use of these substances, which ultimately led me to greater self-awareness and joy and presence in my friends and family, that I had to fight that internal stigma associated with which became stronger as a parent as well.
Yeah. Parenting and psychedelics is a really interesting topic. Maybe we can come back to it.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to come back to that. I'll share a little bit about my history as well. Some of my first experiences with psychedelics were with psilocybin mushrooms as a teenager. They were novel experiences for me at the time, where I actually connected to a similar space that you mentioned about childhood and a kind of animistic quality, where it was confirmed for me that like, wow, that like joy and aliveness and connection I felt with playing in a creek as a child, where I felt like the water was alive and the rocks were speaking to me and I could feel a peace and joy and connection to nature. It was like reawakened when I tried mushrooms. Those first couple times were still fairly novel for me and just like exploring the silliness of like, what is this and why are these visuals so strange, and what does this mean for human consciousness? It gave me a bit of validation about a suspicion that I had had about nature being a bit more available to me personally as a personal connection. It wouldn't be until like a decade later until I had some very serious gut issues. I had GERD, acid reflux, was having heartburn on a daily basis for several months straight. Worked with a few specialists, and nothing was really working. Even like drinking water or a smoothie would give me really intense heartburn. So my first more intentional and catalyzing use was with ayahuasca. After a 10-day cleanse suggested to me by a naturopath to get through the digestion issues that I had, I used several different natural non-psychedelic medicines to get through that. 3 days after I completed that 10-day cleanse, I tried ayahuasca for the first time, and it was the biggest catalyst of my life for loving myself and others more, and for the desire to actually take a look at my past and its impact on who I had become and who I wanted to be. And I've since sat with ayahuasca on several different occasions as a part of my yoga teacher training in Peru in 2017.
I won a scholarship to a place called Rhythmia in 2022. And throughout my use, I developed a tremendous reverence and respect for not only ayahuasca, but for other medicines, and just really wanted to see what is the potential for humanity and for society to embrace these substances and medicines at greater scale. I'm still clarifying what that means for me and how that will unfold, and we'll get into some of the updates later. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
it's a bit about how I came to it and where I am now.
It's so interesting that the piece of about gut healing and around that specific, because I remember as someone who has had long time issues with digestion and gut related issues, my very first ayahuasca experience, actually part of it was kind of really zooming into that. There's been a great overlap, and I know there's tons of research about it as well, about kind of, psychedelics and the effects on the physical body and health. But one of my very first, if not my first experience I had, part of it was kind of really kind of zooming into my own gut issues in this way that was really interesting and like tied to my ancestry in a way that was really it was just quite an experience. It's helped mine as well over the years, actually. I've noticed that.
For those listening, we are recording this post-Hurricane Helene and post-election. It's been a wild journey since Hurricane Helene, to say the least. So much grief and rage and confusion and trauma for so many of us. I'm in Bernardsville, North Carolina, where we were hit particularly hard. The road was washed out in several sections. I was first responding for, about 7 to 10 days afterwards before I started to come back to a job. And yeah, I'd like for us to explore some of the election results. Maybe we could explore what happened in Massachusetts first. Did you keep up with any of that?
Yeah, I did see it, and I think that overall, I know there was there were some successes as it relates to psychedelics, but overall, it seemed like everyone got a little ahead of themselves, being excited about these bills passing. So,
Yeah, I think so.
which is a bummer. I laugh, but I'm also sad about it. Yeah, but why don't you? I'm sure you followed it a little more if you want to dive into it for folks and give some context around it.
Yeah. So Massachusetts put up a bill or a ballot number 4 during the election this year in 2024, and they had a large campaign called Yes on 4, which included speakers Erica from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Bessel van der Kolk from The Body Keeps the Score. Several people were speaking out and endorsing this ballot measure, and it was actually a fairly close race, and the yes and no vote count did not pass. There were something like 1.2 million yeses and 1.5 no's, something like that, of
Yeah.
the latest count. Something that's interesting to me is the fact that there was 1.2 million yeses.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there are that many people in such an intriguing state to put something like this up. I mean, you've got Harvard University, several research institutions in Massachusetts that could really shift things.
Yeah.
There were some advocates in the state that were against it, and that were some of the no's. It seems like there are some arguments around home use and personal use and how that fits into the legalization ballot that was put forward. There has been numerous conversations on costs, because Massachusetts put up a similar bill to what Oregon did. Costs are anywhere from like $2,000 to $4,000 from what I've heard to participate in that particular model, which may or may not include preparation, integration, being with you for several sessions or just one session. It depends on where you go. Something that I personally was curious about in the bill was the inclusion of ibogaine and iboga. I'm not quite sure myself where iboga fits in terms of the risks for tachycardia and reciprocity for the folks of Gabon and Africa who steward this. They put forth the Nagoya Protocols, which put forth a legal reciprocity-based initiative for the sale and export of iboga.
Mm,
And I don't know how that fits into bills. I don't know if decrim is the best route. It's honestly fairly confusing. I'm
yeah.
trying to narrow it down state by state, what is best. But I'm sure some of this, some of what I've mentioned and what you've mentioned were in the no votes
Hmm.
that maybe they wanted, maybe they supported, but some of the specific things in the rollout about that ballot they didn't agree with and couldn't vote yes on. And I'm sure that all the organizers and all the people that have worked so hard to get their campaign out there are probably going to go back to the drawing board and listen to what the people say.
Yeah.
This is for the people of Massachusetts, and they voted, and their voice is heard now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like kind of has been the theme of the last few months is that people are going back to the drawing board. People are kind of going back, like stripping things down, going back to the basics, right? And kind of reassessing. I mean, it is true that like, Massachusetts, there are a lot of communities, including Somerville, Salem, other places where there has been decriminalization, right? So things are happening on this smaller level, and there was something that didn't translate on the state level, right? And I do wonder myself about Iboga for all those reasons, but also because it's like that risk, that health risk is pretty extreme and it's pretty serious. And I think it would give most people pause to, I mean, not to say that there are not a lot of, legal medicines out there that can get prescribed to us that also have a risk. And I think that for, what I know about ibogaine and iboga, like that many people are willing to take that risk, right, as well, because the people who really need that medicine are deep in the throes of addiction, right? So it can absolutely save your life, right? And there's a very, very small risk. But I think that, thinking through some of these things, I also think that just it seems like there's just too much. I think that's the criticism that I'm mostly hearing, is that like the wording of it confused people. There was kind of too much going on. People couldn't quite grasp it, right? So it's like so much information, so many things they're trying to get done. I understand why that kind of comprehensive approach is preferable for some reasons, because we've seen what happens when legalization happens without decrim. Right? The marijuana industry is, lining the pocketbooks of a lot of people who are sort of just in it for the money, right? All of that is true. And I think there's something to be said for like keeping things simple and small. So yeah.
Yeah. And what this brings up for me is actually one of our announcements and our first workshop, which will be coming up soon. It's called the Psychedelic Frontier in Appalachia: Policy, Public Safety, and Opportunity. And something that is really important to me in this workshop is a breakdown of some of the basics of this. Part of our mission is to educate Appalachia, whether you're from or living in Appalachia, and we want to simplify it. What is the difference between legalization and decriminalization? What are some of the pros and cons? Even legalization can have a whole spectrum. Most people's assumptions are that it's medical only, but there, for example, could be shared co-ops, which has been put forth by other people. So we really want that workshop to be something that folks can come to learn the basics and get a non-biased perspective on the simplistic options about psychedelics, their role in our society. This is a hot topic. It's going to continue to come up in every state. 9 out of 13 Appalachian states have introduced at least some kind of bill related to psychedelics. Yeah. So this is something that we need to be educated on, we need to be informed on, and we need to leave out as much of the legal jargon as possible, not only in our workshop, but also for any ballot that comes up, so that each individual state and county can really actually see that spectrum and explore it for the benefit of its community members.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about, I think it really is about stripping down so much of the kind of the technicality and the legalese and all of that, and really kind of getting to the heart of things, really getting to that. I think what I'm passionate about, I know you are as well, is that education component of what we're doing. Like, and really kind of sitting down with folks who may not have heard of any of these things, right? Who might have, might have some misgivings, right? Might have misinformation, as well as the people who are really in support, right? And bringing that whole community together to say, hey, here's the information. We're going to lay it out really simply. And what questions do you have? What is you have a role in this, right? I think is what we're trying to do more than anything. Like, where are you sitting at this table during this conversation, right? Where do you want to be positioned? We're going to give you the tools to do that. We're going to give you the information that makes you feel like you're equipped now to have that conversation rather than a bunch of other people, maybe having it for you. Or you getting to the vote and you're the ballot box and you're like, I have no idea what this even means. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, I love that. And I love the intentionality around keeping this objective as a mission of Appalachian Psychedelic Society, as a nonpartisan effect for a resource, essentially the arena for these conversations to happen. If you are from or living in Appalachia, we want your voice to be heard. If you're involved in psychedelics at all, if you're curious about psychedelics, if you don't know anything about psychedelics, or you're a user that has been using for a while, we want to hear from you. We want a robust and safe community across all of Appalachia. We want to destigmatize psychedelics, but we also want to destigmatize Appalachia.
Yeah.
I just got back fairly recently from the Horizons Conference in New York City. And as I was sharing who we are and what we do, so many folks that weren't from Appalachia, they really had no idea what I was talking about. A lot of folks just immediately assumed hillbilly or something, for example, as opposed to at least what we can say from the Appalachian Regional Commission, 13 states with over 25 million people. Maybe we could touch on being Appalachia and being from Appalachia a little bit as well. What's coming up for me is, I came from a small town with a population of 7,000, 2 red lights, 2 grocery stores. I wasn't supposed to make it out and supposed to, travel the road that I did. And I faced that stigma everywhere I went about being from Appalachia, about being from Tennessee. What about you? What kind of things have you seen in your life as far as being from Appalachia? When did you start embracing that? Did you put up a wall against it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that thinking back on it, at least when I've been outside of Appalachian, outside of the state, right? Like when I went to grad school and, when I was outside of the South, right? And I think I'm speaking to particularly kind of my Southern Appalachian identity.
Right.
That people sort of like, there wasn't any gradation between you're from the South versus you're from the Appalachian South. Like it was all sort of like, you're from the South. I don't have an accent. Unfortunately, I picked up more of like a Rochester accent in my time up there, but they noted that they could hear my sort of Southern accent or my kind of twang, right? And which was always really confusing to me because I never heard it myself, right? But I do remember when I was younger really resisting like what I perceived as kind of like rednecky, sort of hillbilly kind of cultural practices, really, which would be things like, like old timey music, kind of like that kind of hillbilly red, like back holler, like string music, kind of, picking on the porch, right? And that guy, like,
Love.
yeah, right, totally. But back then I was like, this so not cool, right? And it's only like sort of not cool, but it's like, I have internalized things about Appalachian culture, and I especially did it early. And like my mom, we're big horror fans. My mom showed me Deliverance when I was like in the 3rd or 4th grade, which is a whole nother can of worms to unpack. But like that's kind of the image a lot of people have of Appalachia. And like for me, I was like, oh, I know where that river is. And also like I feel like this is showing me something that's like true maybe about my region, right? Like that's like, so it was this weird thing to hold. That's like, well, I don't know of anybody who's had an experience like that. I'm pretty sure my dad kayaks on that river, but like, maybe like, so there was this kind of like dissonance in my identity for sure that then just sort of got like blanketed as kind of Southern identity when I left the South. Right. But I think especially coming back from up north and kind of really choosing to be here. Like I was born here and I always loved it, but then I made this choice to return. Right. And I think that set in motion this very kind of deliberate learning about the region in a way that, I sort of like lived in it, but I didn't really learn it. Right. So I got, especially like in COVID actually is when I got really interested in like what are the plants that grow around me in Appalachia? Like, what are they for? Like, not only are like native species, but like, what are like the non-native invasives that are like, you know, the kudzu that's like consuming everything? What is that for? Like, can we use that for anything? Like, in fact, you can, a lot of things, right? But so, and then also these traditions that I think, you know, it's sort of like you see them dying out. Like, how many times have you heard about, you know, an Appalachian family sitting up, you know, with their dead and having like a dumb supper, right? And all these things that are sort of like also just kind of slowly being erased, right? That in fact, like I personally am really interested in exploring and learning about. And I'm like, I feel hungry for that. And I feel hungry for those traditions that really set this region apart in these ways that are very culturally distinct and very, very rich to me. So for me, it's become a lot of like, what can I learn about this? Like, and, you know, I had my ancestors lived in Tennessee, kind of near Knoxville, on my dad's side, and in Georgia and in North Georgia, and also kind of Athens area. And then my mom kind of came from the Piedmont, right? So I'm like, it's not like I was, you know, 8 generations deep in Madison County or something, but I do feel like I can sort of claim that heritage a little bit. So that's also like something for me. I'm like, well, how many generations do you have to live here to be a true Appalachian? That's kind of like what I come up against. I'm like, can I really call myself that? And so kind of like claiming that, it's been funny to sort of be like not interested in it as a child. And now I'm like, do I deserve to like call myself that? So that's a little bit of my story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, the word Appalachia too, there's a lot of debate. I know there's some Appalachian majors out there that are going to speak to this way better than I can, but my knowledge of it is that it comes from, it's an indigenous word that came from North Florida, which was put on maps in the 1500s, and then eventually became the entire mountain region. The name for the entire region. And it's almost a tough sell sometimes to feel like, well, what is that? But because to me, it's the whole mountain range, it comes back to that land relationship belonging kind of feeling where I was called back. And I really feel I was called back by the mountains themselves.
Same.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to the Talking Appalachian podcast recently, and saw also a post by Barbara Kingsolver, author of Demon Copperfield. Both of them admitted to altering or adjusting their Appalachian accent when they were younger, which I did. You know, really, I don't know. Both of my parents are pretty Southern sounding, and especially my dad, but there something in me felt like it was a disadvantage to have a similar accent. You know, maybe it had to do with the explosion of technology during my youth. You know, the internet coming about when I'm around age 8 to 10, and the explosion of the sharing of information and cultures. And as a small town Appalachian boy, I became super interested in basketball and hip hop and rap and things that, you know, weren't inherently Appalachian. But over time, we are just all having to expand on what is Appalachia. I mean, there are so many different ethnicities of people that I consider absolutely Appalachian. You know, to me, if you're living in here, you're not from here, or you came back, doesn't matter. What I want to see is people in this whole region thriving, and feeling proud to be from the mountains and to not hide those accents. You know, mine comes out every now and then. Occasionally, if I've had a drink or two, it definitely slurs. My y'all starts getting thicker and thicker. But I had the same experience in California. People out there were saying I sounded Southern, and it wasn't until I left that I was like, oh, I guess I do still have some of it. And the older I get, the more I embrace it.
Right. Yeah. I like it better than the Rochester accent. I'll say that. Right. I'm sort of mad I picked that one up. I'm like, can I just soften the edge of that one a little bit? So yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, what you said about, I think also that's a really important thing that we're working to get across. And a lot of other people have done this work too. It's just the diversity in Appalachia, right? You have this like, many people have this, you know, deliverancy idea, which also I still love that movie. Like, I
want to tell us about the movie. I actually don't know if I've seen that movie.
No way! Oh my gosh, a classic, but it also is like, oh man, talk about Appalachian stereotypes. It is the ultimate in Appalachian stereotypes. It's about it's got a bunch of really famous actors, and of course I'm blanking on all of their names now, but like the most famous kind of their era. I want to say Burt Reynolds is in it or something, and that, and it's about these friends that are going on this paddle trip, and they go to to Appalachia, the sort of backwoods Appalachia, to get on this river, and they immediately run into trouble because they run into the locals who do not like them because they're outsiders, right? Which is this big sort of myth of Appalachia, that we're not welcoming to outsiders at all, which like has some, there's a little truth in there, I think, too. There's like a lot of kind of pride in regionalism and things like that. But, and so they get in with the locals, they get in a little trouble there. And then as they're going down the river, they realize that these, like very dangerous sort of like, inbred rednecks, like kind of literally, it sort of makes that pretty clear, are like after them. And they, between like, the raging river and the raging inbred rednecks, they do not do well. So I think it's a movie that makes a lot of Appalachians really mad, and it also is a really good horror movie.
Yes.
So
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of films with that. I know. I mean, the typecast experience of any kind of race or ethnicity has been such a challenge to fight against for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to look up the river it's on. I want to say it's maybe this should too. Burt Reynolds is in fact in it. I'll find that out. But it's a river that I have been on kayaking, which is also funny.
I love that.
But yeah, like there's this kind of sense that Hollywood has put out, and that a lot of people have put it across. And JD Vance has put it out too. That we're just kind of like opportunistic, inbred, like not good people, like, and that is out there, and that has been out there sort of historically about Appalachia. And in fact, like I think also what I've seen in the aftermath of Helene is just this reminder of like incredible Appalachian resilience. And like, it's not fair that Appalachia has had to be as resilient as these people have, right? But like it's true and remains true even with people who are newer here, that like the coming together of communities and the kind of returning to traditional practices to sort of like survive, right, is so kind of baked in. And there's this huge diversity of traditions. We have Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which is a federally recognized tribe, has their own government, right? We have Appalachia, right, that kind of wonderful movement of Black Appalachians that reclaiming. We have astonishing diversity in our population here, that I think it's been critical to really kind of put an eye on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, when folks ask me about my ancestry, I call myself like an Appalachian mutt. I'm like
Dog.
yeah, I'm like Scottish, Irish, German, and Yuchi. My great grandmother on my mom's side was Yuchi, a Native American tribe, mostly around Kentucky, but also found in North Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up with her or anything, but I did grow up with a mother who very much identified with Indigenous values. Our house was covered in Indigenous paintings, and it was very much a part of my ontology and worldview.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, on that topic, like the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, like I have sort of looked to, because they're not, they have their own government, right? They're a sovereign nation, and they have been really trailblazers in this region in terms of deciding, like, okay, we're gonna sell recreational marijuana, like on the
Right.
on the land,
And
right?
they're doing
it, right? So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see them as these kind of like front runners in all of this, and I think it's really remarkable that is happening in this region, and it's something that I feel like the whole nation should be sort of looking to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I recommend everybody check out the Cherokee Museum. I went recently, and it's really stunning. I put so much work into that. It's a really great resource for the whole region to consider the actual history of what's happened here. And I remember talking to Sonny Ledford briefly a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And you know, I asked him, I went to this festival where there was like a meeting point of like Civil War enthusiasts and Cherokee people, and it was like the same festival. And it was such an intriguing happening for me. And I talked to Sonny briefly and I asked him, like, you know, do you feel good about being here? Is this something that you are super proud of, like this offering? And he said, yes, absolutely. He got very stern and very Sonny. If anybody's ever listened to Sonny, he has a couple podcasts out there that I recommend checking out. But Sonny said that most of their education around the history of what's happened in Appalachia and the wars and everything that came about is it's actually not reported in books for them. And so anytime they have an opportunity to share their part of the story, they are all for. And that at that particular festival, they were given that freedom. So
not interesting.
It's worth noting.
And I'll just say too, like for folks who don't know who are outside of Appalachia, or even some folks in Appalachia, because you mentioned the Civil War, right? That it was more complex than I think people think, especially in Southern Appalachia, like what side, right, you were on. Everyone assumes, well, you're in the South, you had to be with the Confederacy, right? And in fact, there's this really fascinating history about the county I live in, Madison County, where it was really split. Like the town of Marshall was more Confederate, and then outside the town in the Shelton Laurel community was really with the Union, right? These people did not have enslaved people. They were kind of sort of like, you know, hard scrabble, like really kind of bootstrapping it out there. And it ended in this event, the Shelton Laurel Massacre, that is this incredibly interesting and tragic historical event where neighbors and were actually, you know, killing each other over this conflict, right? Because they were on different sides, because one side was withholding food from the other side, right? So it's just, it's everything here is way more complicated than anyone realizes, I think, if they're outside of the area.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. It really, you know, brings to me my value of like cultural complexity and nuance that I think probably at large as a species, we're being asked to embrace more and more nuance and to engage in more mature conversations that allow, you know, the supposed two sides of things to arise in the conversation and allow folks to find the nuances in both sides and to hear both sides. That's what I really hope for all. Regardless of election results, regardless of religious or spiritual affiliations, I hope that we're able to engage in these conversations, be it about history, about psychedelics, about religion or politics, whatever is happening. If we could engage in that with more of a maturity and nuance, that would be great.
You know what's so fascinating is, as you're saying that, it's really taking me back to the, like, in the psychedelics experience itself, when they do MRIs, when they scan actual brains, the two sides of the brain, right, sort of like go offline in the way they normally function, and they come back online in this like incredibly interconnected way, right? So it's like clearly this sort of two sides narrative. Like, obviously we have to use the two sides of our brain in the way that we do, right, in order to kind of get through the day and have like an ego structure and all of that. But like really what benefits us in the psychedelic experience, and I think in like default reality, is when we can remember that there's a lot of complexity and nuance, right? And that in fact, when we can connect those two sides in new ways, right, we suddenly realize that, oh, there's a whole interconnected vast landscape. These two sides are actually an illusion. So that blew my mind when you were saying that. So
Absolutely
fascinating. If you have never looked, listeners out there have never seen kind of scans of the brain on psychedelics, it is just incredible what happens.
Yeah. And what a, like, honestly stunning time to even have the technology to start looking at this from all perspectives. You know, through this Western perspective that's like kind of like obsessed with its mental knowledge and the brain and neuroplasticity and everything. And now we're finding out so much about psychedelics and different ones for specific stuff. Like there's even a study out right now with salvia. Forget what for. It's for some legitimate medical use at a university. Which I was like, do you know what it is?
No, I'm just remembering back to the last MAPS I went to, I actually attended a presentation, a scientific kind of presentation on salvia and I'm trying to remember what the research was and I'm blanking, but yeah, it was really interesting.
All right, Ali, well, let's start to close it up here. Any last things you want to tie in about who we are, what we're up to, ways people can learn more?
Man, that's it. Yeah, I mean, I think the workshop, which have we said the date for it? Probably
We didn't say the date, so yeah, go ahead.
I can't remember. Actually,
December 19th.
Okay, good. I was gonna say the wrong week.
Yeah, no worries. December 19th, y'all. It's going to be 6 to 7:30 on December 19th. We'd love to have you there.
Virtual.
We're doing it donation based and virtually. So you'll see the event link description in the show notes. Share it with your friends and family. We'd love for you to be there and to hear your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's our timeline got a little rocked by Helene.
Yes.
But we are hoping to have, many more of these workshops and opportunities just to gather virtually and in real time. And I know one of my goals for this next year is to get out and about in the community more. So I'll be presenting on a panel at Chacruna's Psychedelic Culture Conference in late March, which is going to be in the Bay Area, which I'm really excited about bringing that. I think the panel itself is going to be more around like media in the psychedelic space, but I am going to definitely mention Appalachia. And at some point, you and I will also be kind of presenting on that specifically for Chacruna in a more virtual space. We're still working on a date for that. And there's a wonderful nonprofit in the space that does a lot of educative work. Those are things I'm excited about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you got asked to be on that panel. I love and celebrate when Appalachians are given a seat at the table at these conferences. For those that don't know, there are psychedelic conferences happening in every corner of the world. So far, no large ones in Southern Appalachia. That is one of our long-term goals and visions as well. So, there are Appalachians out there. You've got Brian Hubbard, originally from Kentucky, a lawyer who is pretty active in educating people on Iboga and its use for opiate use disorder. So there's a lot happening. We've got some of that data on our website. We've got a couple tabs on psychedelic community groups that exist in Appalachia, like other societies. There's the Asheville Psychedelic Society. The Tri-Cities Psychedelic Society in North Tennessee has just started recently. We've got a tab on psychedelic policy and all of the updates that we know of for each Appalachian state. Anything else?
It's a great question. I don't know. Yeah, we've got a newsletter that's going to be going out a little more regularly now that we have some of these events on the docket. You can sign up at our website. Just excited to keep exploring these topics. And also, I think just be in the position where I can finally, share that I'm doing this work and share that I'm a resource for other people, right? And I love the way that we've positioned ourselves in this space, right?
Yeah, we've also got a tab on our website for consulting and integration coaching. Yeah. If you or someone you know has struggled with psychedelics or psychedelic experiences, we want to be a resource to you. And if we can't, we will find someone for you, because it is really important to us that there is a safe and robust infrastructure in Appalachia. So reach out to us. Our website is AppalachianPsychedelicsSociety.org. Same handle on Instagram and Facebook. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. If you have questions, email us. Check out the website. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
I am listening.